definitely the best. And little did I know, I was, only 15, 14, whatever it was. And I came 300. There was a moment when I remember going to my first national team trials and I came in the top 6. That's when my confidence comes out. So it's sort of a bit like I had a coach that used to call it the cage tiger. When I left being an athlete, I did a year at Sport England, which was bloody brilliant. I then spent an amazing 3 years at the
And thanks for tuning in today. This week's episode is brought to you in conjunction with Upskilled and their mini MBA. If you want to get the skills and knowledge to help move you forward without all of the big expense, then this mini MBA with Upskilled is the right way to go. Follow the link in the show notes and you can get $500 off. Today, I have Gwyn Batten on the Second Win Academy podcast, the show that delves into the decisions that athletes make when they transition from professional and elite sport. Gwyn was a world-class rower representing Team GB at 10 championships and also at 2 Olympics. Now, when she retired from rowing, she became a firm part of the sporting world, holding positions with Sport England, Youth Sport Trust, and now Volleyball England. As a rower, she built a unique way of leading organisations, teams, collectives, especially in organically functioning roles. She is now an integral part of the new people plan for Volleyball England as Deputy CEO. Gwyn, welcome to the show.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. It's great to be on. And
Wonderful.
That's pretty impressive. It almost sounds like it's not me, that line.
And yet it is wonderful, isn't it? As you look back and you hear these things that how you are described and you think, wow, is that really me? Am I doing those things? Did I do those things?
Yeah. And one of the things I've found out, whether it's your career or whether it's your sporting career, it always seems easy. And it always seems like there's a pathway and it's all perfectly planned. But the one thing I definitely know, it was not easy. And sometimes making those decisions, like a sliding door moment, you make a decision, it transforms your life. So, yeah, it's very easy to put in a paragraph. It's damn hard to live.
Yes, absolutely. Well, the beautiful thing is we're going to spend 30, 40 minutes or so, I guess breaking down that paragraph and just trying to understand how you went from that elite athlete to where you are today. And really ups and downs, and just see what we can, see where we go, see what we can learn from one another as we go through this story. Now,
Great.
Where I want to start is kind of where you are. Well, now I kind of say physically, where are you? But, Deputy CEO, Volleyball England, what does that mean?
Well, it means I work very closely with Charlie Ford, who's the chief exec. And between the two of us, we carry off those functions. Volleyball England's a really small national governing body in respect to, some of the giants that are out there like tennis or FA or rugby. And because of that, we have to operate very deeply, do you see what I mean, and very widely. And it's really good fun. I'm really enjoying it. I've been here about a year and 10 days. We've got the typical challenges national governing body has. We're trying to make sure the relationship with their memberships really powerful and strong, but at the same time keeping up with the compliance and the governance requirements of modern society and modern sport.
That's brilliant. You're not just the sort of chief volleyball player, but there's a lot more that goes into it. Now, when we talk about Volleyball England, what does that encompass? What are the sports or, I'll say different disciplines within Volleyball England that it covers?
Yeah, so there's 3 main ones. So we've got indoor, which is, of course, the primary Olympic discipline, in essence, for volleyball. And then you've got the sort of young upstart, which came out of the US and it went to the first Olympics in '96, which is beach. which is really exciting, and which I think we have some great teams out there at the moment, including the Bello brothers out there doing really great stuff on the world stage. And then we've got our sitting, so the sitting side in the Paralympics, and we've got a great GB team there. But both of our beach and our sitting are right on the edge of qualifying, so it's unlikely. Fingers crossed that we might see them in Paris, but more likely that we'll see them in Los Angeles. But there is a couple of hidden disciplines in volleyball which are great that I'm really excited to. One is snow volley, which of course is on the snow, and that's great. And we occasionally need some snow for that event to take place there. So that's a really emerging discipline. But probably one of the oldest ones, and the ones where volleyball really had its roots and had a huge amount of engagement at a grassroots level, is grass volleyball. There was a huge festivals that used to take place. It was incredibly popular, and I predict that over the next, maybe 10 years, that we potentially might see a re-emergence of grass volleyball out there.
That's fascinating. Just the snow volleyball, grass volleyball, it's just never occurred to me. I am, well, I'm not going to do it now, but I'm sure everyone who's listening is Googling snow volleyball just to try and figure out, well, one, are they on the snow? But two, what on earth are they wearing? Actually, but hold that. Yeah, I was going to say, I was like, what does that look like? Anyway, but we'll move on. We'll move on from the intricacies of the different disciplines of volleyball, but thanks for sharing that. I suppose I'm curious, if anything, on, how you, Gwyn, really found yourself in Volleyball England. Given your background as a rower, what can you... actually, before we jump there, let's go a little bit further back and let's talk about you as the rower, because I'm always curious about that backstory that initiates or kickstarts the sport and how that goes. So what was sport like for you when, as you were growing up? What did it mean?
I mean, I was absolutely fascinated by sport. I literally couldn't get enough. And to me, it really didn't matter which sport. I wanted to do everything. I was one of those really annoying kids that would sign up for every single club after school and not be able to go to all of them. I think each week I'd choose a different one. So I just couldn't get enough of it. And I think, and I just loved the camaraderie. I loved the challenge. I loved the concept of beating people and the way it made me feel. That was, and I think some of it was the yin and yang, I think, because I was undiagnosed with dyslexia, so I really struggled at school, and as a result of that, I was pretty naughty. I was quite good at being naughty. Not that I should be proud of it, but yeah. So it was that whole relationship with school, which I wasn't very good at, sport, which I was relatively good at, not brilliant, and then that whole bit: where do I fit in life? And because I was, at the back of the queue going to lunch because I came last in the mental arithmetic questions, he had it drummed into me that I wasn't very good at school. So.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah.
And
so
it sounds like
that's the beginning of why I was obsessed.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because it sounds like sport was a little bit then of that escape for you as well, or at least somewhere where you weren't, last in arithmetics.
Yeah, I think so. And I think what then led it to me, I watched, and the story is, so many athletes have this story, and it's funny how we're so similar, is I watched the Olympics on television at age 14, and I saw Seb Coe and Steve Ovett running around the track, and I thought, oh my God, I love the way the commentators are talking about them. That is what I want to be. So some people say they want to go and land on the moon and be an astronaut. I wanted to be a professional athlete because I think I didn't want, I reflect back now, I didn't want to win medals. I just wanted respect. So I was after respect, and I felt that sport was the way I could gain that respect. And so I decided that I wanted to go to the Olympics. And there's this classic story. I think about 6 weeks later, I was pretty good at cross-country running. And 6 weeks later, I went to the English Schools Cross-Country Championships. I think it must have, I have no idea where it was, but the mud was really red. And I remember I was thinking, well, I'll win this, and then I'll go to the Olympics, because then I'll be the best. And little did I know, I was, only 15, 14, whatever it was. and I came 303rd. And I remember being absolutely devastated that my dream, all of about, a couple of months, had gone, and that was the end of the world. And I remember talking in my head to myself and saying, well, if I can't be good at one thing, one sport, I'll be as good as I possibly can as at many sports. And I'll be that, hence why that drive to do loads and loads and loads of sports. And then, to be honest, it wasn't until I went to university. I first went to university at Southampton University to read ship science because I wanted to design yachts. And I was doing, honestly, I was doing so many sports at university. In fact, in the end, I actually left the university because they said that I really needed to give up all the sport I was doing and to be able to study a little bit more. So that's hence why I went up to Leeds Carnegie to study sports science. But it was at Southampton University that I found rowing. What was really interesting about rowing was a sport I instantly wasn't good at. Whereas all the other sports, I was quite one of those lucky, pick it up and I'm relatively good. This one was the one that really did my head in. And I think some of that was because in rowing, if you're powerful, it's really hard to learn. Yeah, you have to basically go with the flow of the water. And if you're really strong, it means you can try and override the power of the water. Yeah. So it took me ages to get good at rowing, but the worm was in my head. And it wasn't until about probably 4 or 5 years later that I went to my first national team trials, and that started to go from there. I mean, it wasn't all straightforward. There was a moment when I remember going to my first national team trials, and I came in the top 6. These were the final trials. They're going to select the team after this. So you've done all the prelims to get to this point. Came in the top 6. They selected 6 people for the World Championships. My name wasn't on the list. And I rang up the chief coach at the time, and I said he was Ron Leeds, actually. And I said to him, why am I not in the list? And he said, Gwyn, you're too small. You'll never be an international rower. And I am pretty small, but I'm pretty strong, and I'm pretty good on the rowing machine. But what I couldn't do was prove that, because often at the time we were doing trials with 2 people in a boat, in a pair with 1 oar on each side. And I couldn't prove that it was me that was making the boat go fast. And so that's why I then went into the single scull. And exactly 12 months to that very phone call with Ron, I was ranked 8th in the world in the single scull. I was coached by an amazing coach called Rosie McGoughlin, who in that year took me from being a novice sculler to being of that standard. Really interesting how she coached. It was really innovative at the time. And so I spent I became a sculler. So I only ever once represented Great Britain in sweep. And that was at the very end of my career in the women's 8s, where I stroked the women's 8 at the World Championships. It had amazing bounce and switches to get to where I ended up in rowing.
Hi, I want to take this moment to thank Upskilled and their mini MBA for sponsoring this week's session. One of the great things about their mini MBA is it allows you to gain the skills and knowledge to help propel you that little bit further forward. It gets you understanding the vocabulary in the room and also gives you some of those skills to navigate the corporate career, the government career, or indeed stepping into not-for-profit. So big thanks for Upskilled and the mini MBA for sponsoring this week. And hey, check it out. Link in the show notes. You can get $500 off.
That's right. And it's what's actually really interesting in that is, for one, it was the sport. It sounds like it annoyed you because you weren't automatically good at it. And so then that just pushed you. I do love the fact you had this dream at 14, 15, and again, history paints a beautiful picture, but you wiggled and figured out which sport can I go and actually do that in, and team sports, 2s, and in the end it was, well, actually it's just down to me, and you can tell because it's just you, one person.
Yeah, and I mean, what was quite interesting is rowing is the ultimate team sport because you've got individual accountability, so you're only ever as fast as your weakest player or rower, and so it's really accountable, but you're also in a team where everyone has to conform. You can't even wear different clothing. You can't row in a slightly different way. You have no flair. There's no man of the match or most valuable player or anything like that. You are carbon copies of each other when you're trying to row. But I had spent, when I was up at Leeds Carnegie, I'd spent 3 years being part of the athletics program, and being coached by a guy called Wilf Paish and Mick Hill, and a whole load of athletes in that group. And I learned how to be an individual sports person out of that group. Athletics is track and field is a really tough sport to be an international athlete in, because everyone loves you when you're doing well, but nobody cares when you're doing badly.
How would you describe what you learned, how to become an individual athlete? What was the shift for you?
The shift for me that I learned from being around exceptional track and field athletes was that it really was down to you. If you wanted to make the difference, you had to go and find your coach, you had to go and find your team to train with, you had to go, if you wanted specialist stuff, we went and did some specialist weightlifting stuff, go and find them and actually take control where you can take control. And in athletics, of course, you can, because it's an individual. It's much harder in rowing, where you do have to, and I guess in rugby and football and stuff like that, where you do have to conform to the manager. But it was that individualness that really paid off in my single. Learning in the single scull, you've got to be really hard. You've got to be hard in two ways. You've got to be hard, and you've got to wake up in the morning to get going, and you're doing it for yourself. And if you don't turn up, the training's not happening. Whereas in a crew boat, at least they'll put a sub in if you're ill, and it's still progressing. And then in the race, and I always used to say that endurance sport, pain is the currency of endurance sport, and it's how much you can train your body to absorb all that pain as you go through the race or whatever. I know it sounds to non-endurance athletes, it's horrific, but to endurance athletes, it's sending those mental messages over the physical messages coming from your body. And it's when you're in a crew boat, you can do it for other people. Oh yeah, do it for each other. When you're on your own, it's like, oh, it's me. It's only me. If we only lose, I'm the only one that's accountable. You know what I mean? So it's quite hard. Anyway.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It is. It's wonderful. I just love, listening, as we will continue, as we'll go on and talk about, that shift to get to where you are today and how that moves. But it is always fascinating for me to listen to those stories of athletes, like yourself, of, well, how you got there and what changed, and when did you become good? Which is something I do want to find out is, when did you realize you were really good at this?
Well, I guess that's a really good question, because I think that's a really important journey of because you're always making that decision. When will I commit? When am I going to step out of my career and make sport my career? And I was pre-lottery, so it was even harder. We didn't have any money in that space. I realised I was really good on the rowing machine. The rowing machine was just emerging. They had some domestic competitions called the Daft Power Sprints. Channel 4 had this competition, which was a 1-minute erg rowing machine challenge. And I could beat all of the guys that were going to the Olympics on the machine. So I knew that I was an absolute, I don't want to say a beast, or you know what I mean? I knew, but what I wasn't very good at was the technique and all the finesse. So I knew that if I could do the technical bit. And then the other bit that was really amazing for me was, of course, my sister rowed. She's 3 years older than me, and she was on the team before me, and I knew I could beat her. And it was like, well, if she can do it, then I can do it. So I would say I was probably not the most confident person as an athlete, and my sister had a lot more confidence and commitment, I guess. But I knew that, she could do it, I could beat her. That was my thing. She would say, of course, that I couldn't beat her, but there you go. But I think...
What do you mean?
I honestly... Sorry.
No, please. Well, what I was going to ask is, when you say you lacked confidence as an athlete, what do you how would you describe that confidence then, that difference between you as a champion, an Olympic medalist, to say you lacked confidence as an athlete? Talk me through that.
Yeah, I think it's really odd. So I sort of sit there and think I'd like to do something. So I'm a good dreamer. So I'm really good at my dreams. And then I try them, and I try to get there, and I can't get there. It always takes longer. So maybe and my confidence is based on results. So rather than having some, so it's based on results. If I do well, I get a bit of confidence, and then I do well. So if you get a setback, I then lose my confidence quite quickly. And so I've found, I do see people out there that will quite often say, "Oh, I'll do this," and then they do go and do it, and I'm like, "How did that happen?" There's no way that I'll dream what I'm going to do, that I don't necessarily shout about it. But what is interesting with the confidence side, I do have this sort of inner confidence, and I guess this is the bit that if you kick me, that's when my confidence comes out. So it's sort of a bit like I had a coach that used to call it the cage tiger confidence. So if you push me back, I will come out so hard. And I think that that's a little bit, do you remember what I was saying about Ron Needs, who said I would never be an international rower? Well, that was the inner tiger, the cage tiger coming out, the inner confidence. So, yeah, and as I've gone on, and that's, we went on and we won that medal at the Olympic Games, but it's been really interesting what I then did afterwards in rowing, was I then went into sort of ultra endurance side, got the world record for the English Channel, rowed across the Atlantic, done lots of little crazy things in little places. But a lot of those are where people have told you they're impossible to do. So it does, I think, and it's really interesting, Ryan, I've never connected it like that, but that sort of caged, say it's impossible and I'll take it as a challenge. Say, "Oh, Gwyn, it'll be amazing, anyone can do it," and I'm chasing someone else and I'm like, "Oh, maybe am I good enough?" All that sort of timidness seems to come back.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I love that. I love the caged tiger as well. And you just touched on it there. Perhaps answered it. The inspiration to do many other crazy things. So whilst you were there, accomplished in, I don't know, do I say traditional rowing? But in the event
classic
that
rowing, they call it these days. Yeah, I mean,
classic rowing. Yes.
So basically, I spent so I went to the 96 games in my single scull and came fifth, which, at the time was one of the best achievements that you could have had. I mean, subsequently, some really great athletes have gone on. We've never medalled at the Olympic Games in single scull, so one day a British woman will, which would be amazing. But I did I did about, I think it was about 7 years in my single scull, and then moved into the quad scull. So it's 4 people sculling, and it is the fastest sculling boat. It's just a little bit slower than the 8. And we managed to get, in 1999, got the last qualifying slot for the 2000 Olympics. We've never put a very strong boat into the quad scull. And in 2000, we put a boat in that, on paper looked like it might come 5th at the Olympic Games. And we had a really, really chaotic run into the games. Like Sarah Winkler, one of the athletes in the boat, unfortunately went injured. We reselected the seat in the boat. Gillian Lindsay came in and blow me down. We had 5 weeks to put everything together, which in rowing is usually you've spent 2 years doing this. We just came out with what was an exceptional boat, and we were able to get the silver medal and win Great Britain's first ever women's rowing medal, which was the beginning. It was a glass ceiling. After that, just the medals, the female women rowers just absolutely nailed it. I'd retired by then, but we'd smashed the glass ceiling, and it was like, medal after medal after that.
Well, it's a bit like that glass ceiling. It's a bit like you've been inspired watching, was it the 800, 1500? Was it? I'm trying to think of the race. Yeah, I know. I'm thinking back to it as like, yes, well, they were both awesome. So, but going back to that, and it's that inspiration. And so you'd have had many of the younger ladies watching that, been inspired by you, thinking, oh, well, as they say, you can't be what you can't see, but suddenly that inspires everyone and shifts us forward. Right. And so then it's, thinking about you then and that career. So it is, a wonderful career, certainly from we talk classic and then we go into some of the other, I'll say, crazier things that you perhaps have done. At what point did you start to realize, hold on, this level of competing that you're able to perform, at what point did you start to realize this is going to end at some point and I'm going to have to figure out something else to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got this theory, and I don't know if you know, but when I went up to Leeds Carnegie, I did human movement studies, and then came to Loughborough University, where I am at the moment here, and did my master's, and then went on to be the exercise physiologist for the rowing team before I became an athlete. See what I mean? So that was sort of my sort of academic side. And fundamentally, from what I see anecdotally in rowing, a lot of the athletes around about the age of 32, give or take a couple of years on either side, are achieving their best rowing results in terms of their power output, etc. So you're in decline really from your early 30s. I reached my peak at 32, and I knew that I wanted to get on with my career. Like anything, some people are really good. They time it perfectly and they retire. I got spat out. I really thought I could make Athens because I knew that the athletes in that mix, we could have won a gold in Athens, absolutely. But I trained through. I was on training camp in Canada. I got flu before I went. I flew. Thought I had jet lag. I actually had not got over my flu, so I ended up 3 months later being diagnosed with overtraining. It took 6 weeks out, and once I'd got into that cycle of overtraining, my body was really struggling to take the volume of training that I needed to do to be successful. So I remember went to a set of trials. And I normally in the old days used to come first or second in my single scull. I think I came sixth or something. And I walked away and I realized the flame had gone because I didn't care that I'd come sixth. And at that moment, I knew that I needed to get on with my life, that athletic side was over and done with, and I needed to move. So I say you either get spat out or you choose to get out. I reckon I got spat out because my sport told me I was too old and too slow. So,
yeah. Wonderful. Well, thanks for sharing it so openly, because it is the openness, the vagary of sport is somebody or someone, whoever you're competing against, or the selectors are going to tell you at some point you are too old, too slow to keep going. I love the way you actually said, with regards to the overtraining, you said you knew the standard or you knew the level of training that you needed to achieve in order to make the team, and your body couldn't do it. And that is that separation between sort of you and your physical ability. It's like, well, that's what I need to do. I can't do that. Equals. There's the output.
Time to get out.
Yes. That's right. So as you walked away and as you sort of, and that sort of, you realized that, what did you do? What were the first things that you did?
Well, what was really interesting, and of course I was about the first era with National Lottery, with where, they were just starting to support. We had 3 months of funding, so it was all about when you told everyone when you were going to go, so you could use this 3 months to make sure you started to get some income coming in. And in effect, remember, you only get paid at the end of your first month of work, so you only had 2 months to get your shit together, in essence. But I guess for me, I knew what I had done. I was really fortunate because I didn't come in. I made my international debut at 24, so I'd had a mini career up front as an exercise physiologist, and I'd made lots of. I knew about the sports setup, but I knew I didn't want to go back into that. The EIS had suddenly come into existence in the time that I'd been an athlete. I used to work at the British Olympic Medical Centre, and we had a great team up there. But I knew that the roles that I was going to go back into, I'd already had the best role ever in exercise physiology. And so I wanted to go into the governance or the decision-making in sport. And what I'd done is I had done a lot of athlete role model work. So I was, at the early part of my career, I was my athlete representative. And then I went on to be the rowing's representative on the BOA's Athletes Commission. And I also helped form, right at the end of my career, just as I was being spat out, especially when, you're overtraining and you've got lots of time, and so I was using that time to be on committees, and so it was all voluntary, and to push for athlete voice all the time as athlete voice. I remember we used to have a regular meeting with the Minister for Sport. It was all about making sure that athletes were heard. But that was all voluntary. I sat on the BOA executive for a while as the athlete representative, and helped form the British Elite Athletes Association. At the time, it was called BAC, British Athletes Commission, and now it's just renamed itself in the last couple of years. So I helped form that. So there was lots of voluntary stuff and so it was a natural segue from there to start working in sport. And it was quite interesting when I exited out, and I've written down here some of the things that were really important to me. One of the things that I did was not only do those committees and be networking with people and be seen at that level, but I also went on a careers thing. And it was really interesting. It was funded by the National Lottery. And I think it was the most important thing, because I would have pitched myself here. And what it did was it helped me pitch myself higher. It helped me to understand all the tricks of the trade of going out there and getting a really cool job. And it was really funny. It was a course for executives, sort of C-suite executives that had been made redundant. And I'm like, I'm not an executive. I'm going to sit in there with all these CEOs and all these things. And I'm a little athlete. But it was a mid-career re-entry back into the recruitment world. It was brilliant. We did loads and loads. It took me 3 weeks to do my CV. That was how, backwards and forwards we went. We had practice interviews, talked about networking, and it was great. And I'm absolutely convinced I'd not gone on that course, I would have ended up with a job that was worth about 10 grand less. It was great. It was really good.
God, that's brilliant. That's excellent to hear, because you're absolutely right. Learning those skills. But what I really like about that is you learnt that with, I guess, people who were in the traditional workforce, or indeed had been spat out of the traditional workforce. So it wasn't necessarily with just a group of other rowers, but it was with other people where you could learn different things, simply by being in the room with them, it seems.
Yeah, and it was the lexicon. It was the words that they were using. You were starting to, being an elite athlete is you're all about covering your weakness. All the time. I need to make sure I'm really good off the start. Between 1 minute and 2 minutes, I've got to train through that bit to make myself that isn't a weakness. But in the workplace, it's all about magnifying your strengths. And to go from that switch is quite hard. And when you're surrounded by people who are magnifying their strengths the whole time, you get on the bandwagon, you feel more comfortable to do it, rather than going, I need to work on this bit or this bit. And of course, employers don't want to know the bits you want to work on. They want to know the bits that you're going to bring to their company.
Yeah. So, very true. I think going into an interview and describing, I'm not very good at this bit, so this is how I compensate for not being good here, and I'm not good at that. Which probably is, like you say, there's an element of humility that comes with being an athlete, because you're aware of what you're not good at in order to be the best. But what is fascinating about what you said is where you pitch yourself. There's a sense coming out being an elite athlete, and like you said, you did have experience, you had education or academic experience as well behind you. But still, coming out as an athlete there in your early 30s, you still have a sense of perhaps undervaluing yourself compared to the rest of the population. Now, why do you think you did that? Why do you think that was the mentality as you were going into that course?
I don't know. I think when I looked at the CVs and I looked at the jobs that I wanted to go for, the words that they used were, because I was doing a career switch as well, because I'd been in exercise physiology and I was trying to go into, sport development. as such,
Yeah.
it had never occurred to me. And so I think a mentor, someone from within the career you're going into is really, really important, because they can teach you where to pitch. Fascinating, you jump forward to coming into this role. I realized that I wanted to work. I want to be part of the decision making. To me, decision making is really important. I really like the fact that you look at something, you see the challenges, you work out where you could potentially be long term into the future, and then what are the steps and decisions you're going to do to get there. And that's why I wanted to go into, sort of directors, CEOs, that type of things in national governing bodies. But when I took the move to come here, I'd spent quite a lot of time networking and talking to people currently in those roles. And it was fascinating how helpful people are. And I think especially if you're an elite athlete coming out of your career, people are going to bend over backwards to help you and give you advice.
Yes, yeah, that last bit, I think they certainly are. As an elite athlete, the way I describe it to others is they will open the door. So if you knock, they will open the door, and they will at least then give you entry. What you do then is up to you. Are you trained? Do you have the vocabulary? Are you able to articulate yourself well enough? But they will at least open the door to welcome you in. And and I'm interested though. Towards the end of your career, you spoke a lot about being on these boards, being ambassadors, athlete representatives, being in these committees. What was the motivation behind doing that whilst you were an athlete?
I think it's the same as it is now. It's the fact that I can see where it can be better, and being part of those decisions and taking the sport there. I've always been so. It's quite interesting. So I'm sometimes a little bit direct. I want to see change. But I want to do it together, because and that was one of the really, really important things when I was in the athletes commission and doing the athletes work, was if you're not at the table, if you're just outside throwing stones in, you are not going to create change. You're going to create chaos. But if you're inside that room at that table and saying it, and it's not all going to happen. You might let one thing through, one bit, and then the next day you'll get another, or the next year you'll get another. And so for me, that change, I want to be around the table. And that's whether it's what I'm doing now as Deputy Chief Exec of Volleyball. I want to be part of those decisions, because I think some of my recommendations and some of the visions that I see, I'd love to see being achieved. And I've been really fortunate that some of those have happened. When I left being an athlete, I did a year at Sport England, which was bloody brilliant. I then spent an amazing 3 years at the Youth Sport Trust setting up their athlete role model programs, which was specifically designed to capture athletes just as they come out of their careers, when they're real fresh with what it feels like to be an athlete, before they transition off into their careers, and get them into schools. Get them talking to youngsters in schools and inspiring them about being the best that they could possibly be. And we got money from Baroness Sue Campbell. She helped us get some funding for the Department of Education around behaviour, and we also got an amazing bit of funding from Sky Sport, and that went on to be the Sky Sport Living for Sport programme, and it was brilliant. But I had this thing in my head that athletes would be great in schools, and and it happened, and it's gone on and been much better without me. I went on to other things. And then the other one that was amazing for me was towards the end of my career, when I was on the athlete representative for World Rowing, on the Athletes Commission, I got asked to go to an event called a Coastal Rowing event. It's the first ever one. It was the first ever World Championships in Coastal. Oh my God, it was amazing. It was like being a track cyclist and all of a sudden seeing mountain biking. And it was like, And I just loved it. I went on and won 2 world championships, when I was working at that stage. And so I did it as a bit of a hobby on the side because the sport was emerging. The standard wasn't quite as high as the Olympics.
Yeah.
But from there, we had the emergence of the beach games. So around about 2015, you started in Mediterranean beach games, Asian beach games, world beach games. And I wanted rowing in the beach games. I'd spent my entire childhood on the beach because my parents had lived in West Africa and the Middle East. And I wanted rowing on the beach. And so I co-designed with a colleague of mine called Pasquale something called Beach Sprints. And Beach Sprints is now in the Olympics in Los Angeles for 28. And, being round that table and making the decisions that create the change is so exciting. And that's what drives me in my career and in my voluntary stuff that I was doing.
Yeah. That's brilliant. I tell you what's really interesting there is you went onto those bodies, to those organizations as a volunteer, as an elite athlete, because there was something inside you said, yeah, I want my voice to be heard. It's like you did that, and there, as an athlete, you're simply being asked to be an athlete and share your voice. That in itself led you to where you are today, but it was based off an interest, based off a desire, a passion, not necessarily being done in order to get you a job at the start. It was done in order for you to make that change. And, that being an important first step, that's that motivation to actually get you started. And, from there, things have run away to where you are today, but it starts with that, well, I'm interested, so I'm going to do something about it, rather than I'm doing this because I want to get a job. And it's, Machiavellian in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree. So it is, but I think the other bit that I also I'm very proactive at doing is networking. Networking without necessarily knowing where networking's taking you. Just building your network for the sake of building your network.
Yeah.
I am fascinated.
How do you learn to do that? How does that come about as an athlete? How does one learn how to, or how did you learn how to do that?
Yeah, I think as an athlete, you're always trying to learn from other people, because you want to make sure you've learned from other people's mistakes so you don't make those mistakes. So you're filling your head up with lots and lots of different types of training programs, lots of different race profiles. So you're filling yourself, you're getting that knowledge, because it's not all when you're an elite athlete, the high level stuff's not written down, and nobody's going to share it unless you're talking to them. So I would go out and find these, and then of course with the athlete role model stuff, it was really, really important to find, because people wouldn't come and tell us what was coming down the chute. We'd have to go and find it. So I would go and try and meet people and navigate through, find out who the key decision makers are in that space. And then now it's fascinating. If you think about the politics of where I am with World Rowing, on the council and being chair of the Coastal Rowing Commission, again, there it's who are the decision makers, when are those key decisions, the timings of those decisions, and making sure that I know who the people are and how to engage with them. Because I always have this thing is, do you have 20 people in your phone book that you can pick up the phone to immediately and ask for their advice, check something with them? And if you don't in your sector have that, you've got to keep networking until you get to that space. So if you've got those 20 trusted voices, and I'm shy. Networking is not easy for me. Yeah, I'm the one, I walk into a conference thing and I'm clutching onto the one person I know. So it's not easy. I'm not naturally like that. But I do know that is one of the single most important things to progressing in your career is networking.
Yeah, and you've spoken about, well, without talking about it specifically as networking, but you've certainly referenced a lot through this conversation about having the right people in your corner, be it an amazing coach who gives you something innovative that helps you progress in a year, be it finding a sponsor, be it listening to people and actually learning from others is something that I've seen or that I'm hearing, is really important. And what's then fascinating, and the bit I kind of want to, I need to, just find this thing. There's two bits that are in my mind now on you. One is that going from a team athlete to an individual athlete, and now running organizations and these companies, there are other people who, you use the example of you're only as strong as the weakest person in your boat. So you went by yourself, and here you are now running organizations and being on these committees. So I'm just curious about that, at least mentally. How do you see yourself now? Has that person changed, or are you drawing on something differently with regards that team to individual and back to team?
Yeah, you as an athlete, you are incredibly selfish, and that's really, really important part of being an athlete. You've got to prioritize yourself, and as I've aged through my career, I've been really, and I still have to work quite hard on it, not to prioritize myself. It's really important that you are part of, you're sowing the seeds within your team, but your team is, the people that have the skills. They are the people that are going to make the difference. And now I find myself in a situation where I'm giving them confidence, I'm giving them the vision, and almost the bits that, so I'm their coach in essence, I guess, without trying to be patronizing about how I say it. But, it is a mind shift. And one of the critical places that I learned that more than anything else was rowing. When I rowed with a crew, there were 5 of us. We rowed from New York to the UK. And my tolerance, when you're very, very tired and, you're right on the edge of survival and you're in quite a scary place with people, that ability to have tolerance of others, as an athlete, my tolerance level was here, and now I'm gradually just able to work much better with people. So it's been a learning curve, and I would say I'm about halfway through that learning curve at the moment.
Yeah, and so with that, then how do you, now as a deputy CEO, you've got a team. You're now building a team. You're finding other people, to come on the boat with you. How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, I think sports. It's quite interesting. The salaries aren't great in the sports that we work in, national governing bodies that I've primarily worked in, and so you get very passionate people, and it's about understanding what their passion is and helping them to bring that alight. Because I don't think of anyone. I don't have anyone who's working in national governing body world that's doing it for the money. Put it that way. And I think but building a team. So it's the same thing as if you're building a football team or you're building a rowing team. There are bits that you need. You need personalities. So you need people that are going to be team makers and are going to make the team more cohesive and more collective. And then there will be people that are real drivers. That's not good enough. This is what we've got to do. And then there are people that just push loads of work down the chute and they do an amazing volume. And then there's the thinkers and so you've got to create that. And then when you've got, when you could do as much as you can on recruitment, but you're not going to get, but then you get what's in front of you. And we've got an amazing team that here at Volleyball, and it's a case of how do we get the best out of each other, and if there's a particular bit of the puzzle that we don't have, let's amongst us find it. I have that saying is that you don't find a perfect team, you create a perfect team, and that's what we're trying to do at the moment here at Volleyball.
Yeah. Wonderful. I've got one last question for you, which is the one I almost asked you right at the start, because this is about transition and that career transition, athlete into the corporate or different sector or governing body sectors. For me, or at least on paper, and I'm sure for those listening, you've done this wonderful transition, which is from a rower to running or being deputy CEO in a game that has nothing to do with water, unless there's another secret volleyball discipline that I don't know of. But how did you make that transition? And the reason I'm interested in it is, what is it that you were bringing then that meant, hey, everyone is saying, hey, she's not a volleyball, she's a rowing person. How does that transition happen? How is that okay?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, what is the transition? I think, as you say, it wasn't a planned one, and it was, switching, and there were sliding doors moments. I think what I've done is I've come out of sport. I've learnt sport development. The 3 C's of sport development. I've worked with some amazing people and learned from them. And from that, I've then, gone on, been part of some amazing pieces of work. Some of them government funded, some of them funded by membership within national governing bodies. And from there, you've just built up those bricks. And the bit that I fundamentally is spending lots of time doing now, of course, is where do we want to be? Okay, what is our strategy? How do we work with the voluntary membership group that we've got and our professional staff? And what are the annual plans that we're doing to get there? So it's no different than whether or not you were an athlete sitting down with your coach at the beginning of your career and saying, right, I want to go to this Olympic Games. What are we doing? Okay, so that's my long-term vision. Okay, how am I going to do it? Well, I need to be in these squads. What do I need to do this year? This is the mileage I need to do this year. Where are we going to train? What training camps are we going to go to? Who can we get in to help us? Do you see what I mean? So it's the same blocks, but it's just in a different environment. I think athletes make exceptional employees. And I think any athlete that goes in there, the bits that they need to change, they need to take the bits that are rubbish of being an athlete and putting it onto the side for a while and put the employee bits in. Like, for example, a number of times I have arranged to meet an athlete and they've turned up late. Is that acceptable? I don't know.
Yeah.
I just think athletes make fantastic employees. They just sometimes need to get they need to get rid of the selfish athlete bit sometimes.
Yes, have it beaten out of us bit by bit. Look, Gwyn, I want to say thank you very much for joining me today and for sharing your story, bringing your perspective to athlete transition. So thanks very much for joining me.
Great, thanks, Ryan. Brilliant.